people whose lives are forever changed. And it happened in a space of very few minutes. 8:48 this morning it began. A few minutes later, at about 9:08, a second plane zoomed towards the unhit tower, the second tower. You see it in the lower part of your screen, and it just slices that tower in half. If we can re-rack it and show it again so you'll know where to look, you'll see the plane first in the lower left side of the screen coming at it, and there it goes. And what must it have been like in those buildings and on these hijacked airliners? We heard earlier that Barbara Olson, a frequent commentator here, was on the flight that was going to Washington, or had been hijacked to Washington. She called her husband and said that the hijacking was underway. She said that from what she could tell, the hijackers, and she didn't indicate how many, except there was more than one, were armed with just knives and cardboard cutters, that they had herded all the people on board this flight to the back of the plane, including the pilot. And she asked her husband, the Solicitor General, Ted Olson, who many of you will recall argued the post-election case before the Supreme Court, said to her husband, "What do I do?" And shortly after that, that plane with Ms. Olson and many more crashed at the Pentagon. General Wesley Clark joins us from Little Rock. General Clark has been with us a number of times today. General, I wonder if you will weigh in for a second on this debate or this discussion that has been going on for most of the afternoon here, which is, have we misapplied in some ways intelligence resources, that we have become so infatuated with what we can do with machines and high tech that we have inappropriately, I guess, spent less money, less time, less effort on the down and dirty human intelligence?
Well, that's certainly a question that everyone is going to be asking, and it will be asked in official channels, and it will be asked to those who are best in a position to give that answer. My experience with it has been that I've heard the charge now for some 25 years in the intelligence business, and we have put emphasis into not only technical intelligence but human intelligence. But you know, it's very hard to get the kind of specific intelligence that would prevent something like this. Many of these people are members of a family. They come from a specific village, perhaps. Their background is known and vetted. They're carefully controlled. Their movements and communications are monitored. And it's difficult, no doubt, for any intelligence organization, no matter how well it's resourced and how courageous its members, to penetrate an organization like that and give us information. Intelligence is always characterized by a failure to know what you don't know. And I'm sure that we'll make improvements. There are always more things that can be done in the aftermath of something like this. But if there's one single message that comes through to me here, and I think will come through to many others, it's that it's not enough simply to put up the best defenses against terrorism, but that more active measures are no doubt called for, particularly in this case.
When you say more active measures, you're talking about proactive?
That's right. Preemptive measures. We've known a number of these groups have for a long time said they declared war on the United States. And we have dealt with them, we've fenced with them, we've cooperated with other governments against them, we've chased individuals, we've hauled some into court. But I think that not only do we have to ask ourselves, could we have learned more in this specific case, we have to also ask ourselves, could we have done more if we'd been willing to take greater risks, if we'd been willing to take more extraordinary measures earlier, to take some of these groups and these individuals at their word that they had declared war on us and they deserved to be taken seriously and they merited some preemptive action.
And just perhaps stating the obvious, sir, when you talk about preemptive action, first of all, you got to be able to find the people you're taking the action against. Do we know where the right people are so that if we're if the country is going after these people, they get the right people.
Well, I think that's always the problem. And there will always be a certain degree of uncertainty, and there'll be a certain degree of concern about this. The best way to handle any international terrorist organization is to arrest its leaders, present the evidence, and have them tried in a court of law. And that certainly is the way anyone would prefer to deal with this. But perhaps in some cases, it's not possible to do that, or it's not possible to do that quick enough. We'll have to ask those questions in the aftermath. It's not simply about intelligence, it's also about acting on intelligence.
I mean, ultimately, sir, this is not simply a military or an intelligence question. This is a core political question. It really has to do with how we see ourselves in a country, whether we are willing to take the risks that some innocents may perish because of what we as a country do, and that's a political question for the country to deal with.
It's a profound political question, and I think it's also a question for the international community, because an event like this is a cry for alarm and recognition in the international community. A tragedy like this can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And international terrorism is too dangerous and too ambiguous and too difficult for any single nation to handle by itself. We need strong, reliable support from friends and allies around the world, and I'm sure we'll be asking for it. And clearly one of the things that ought to come from this is not only better U.S. intelligence, it's better sharing of information, pooling of information with our partners in all corners of the globe.
General Clark, thanks again for joining us, as you have a number of other times today, and I suspect you will again before the day is out. General Wesley Clark in Little Rock, Arkansas today. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Judy?
you.
Aaron, we want to tell our viewers, first of all, that we have just been handed a report from CNN reporter Patty Davis that all international flights have now arrived or will be arriving shortly. It's coming into the United States or Canada. Those are flights that presumably had left their destination hours and hours ago, but they have arrived safely, or they are expected to shortly. We'll continue to bring you updates on air travel as we get them. And I've just been told that President Bush will address the nation tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Now, we had been told a little bit earlier the President would be speaking to the American people. We now have confirmed the time is 9 o'clock Eastern, and you can count on the fact, of course, CNN will carry that address. CNN correspondent Jean Meserve has spent the last several hours at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. These are the people who, Jean, are dealing all the time with disasters. Bring us up to date on what's going on there now.
Judy, the National Interagency Emergency Operations Center is up and running here, as it is often at times of disaster. We went up and looked at that a couple of hours ago. There are about 40 people up there. They represent 28 different government agencies and offices, also the Red Cross and the Salvation Army. What they do is try and figure out what local and state officials need to help them deal with a disaster situation, and they have already made some moves today. They have dispatched urban search and rescue task forces. 4 of them have been sent to the Pentagon. 4 are en route to New York City. Another 4 have been activated, 3 of those in California, 1 in Missouri. Last time I was able to an official here, they were trying to figure out how to get them to New York City. Apparently it was going to take a military airlift because, of course, there is no commercial air traffic at this time. Each of those task force consists of 62 people and about 60,000 pounds of equipment. That's medical gear, tools, dogs, food. The idea is they are supposed to be able to be self-sufficient for 72 hours at a stretch. They provide a wide array of services. They will do search and rescue. They can shut off utilities. They can structural integrity of buildings. There are a total of 28 of these task forces around the country. We've been told that the other 16 most of them have been put on alert status, but they have not yet been activated and given orders to move. In addition, disaster mortuary affairs teams, 4 of them have been sent to New York City, 3 of them to the Pentagon. 30 people on each of these teams. What they do is help take care of the bodies after they have been extricated from the wreckage. Also, there are disaster medical assistants. 4 of them to New York, 3 to the Pentagon, 35 people on each of those teams. Those would be doctors, nurses, and paramedics to help, of course, with the medical situation. I should mention that the director of this agency, Joe Alba, was not in Washington when these events took place. He was out in Montana at a conference of the National Emergency Managers Conference. This is all the state emergency directors from around the country. He, of course, immediately made moves to get back to Washington. We believe he is now on his way here. Judy, back to you.
All right, Meserve telling us about the teams of experienced people who are being deployed from FEMA. That's the nickname for the Federal Emergency Management Agency headquartered here in Washington. But right now, teams of people being sent out, deployed to the sites of these horrific disasters. The New York Twin Towers, World Trade Center. You're still looking at those live pictures on the right part of your screen here in Washington, to the Pentagon, the site of another airplane crash. Joining us now from Charlottesville, Virginia, former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger. He was Secretary in the administration of the first President, George Bush. I want to ask you, Secretary Eagleburger, so many people, we've been talking to a lot of people today, but it seems to me that many Americans now are going to want to strike back, to get back as soon as we can and as hard as we can at whoever was behind this. How realistic is that?
Oh boy, that's a very tough question. Well, it was quick, I think. It'll take us some time to organize ourselves, try to figure out who was responsible for this. Although I must say, by the way, that's less of a concern to me than it will be to a number of others. We know who most of the terrorists are. We may not know which ones did this, although they have to have been very, very well organized and very well financed. But getting back at it almost is the wrong way to, I think, to put this. So that's what a lot of people will want. What I need now to understand is this really is a war with terrorism, and we need to be prepared to act as if we are at war, and that does not necessarily mean that you have to strike back only at those that you know were the perpetrators of this thing.
Well, what does it mean?
We know a lot of terrorists around the world, and we know a lot of governments that have financed and supported terrorism. And you start with Osama bin Laden, I suppose, and you start with the Afghans.
Well, what do you do, Mr. Secretary?
Well, what you do, and this is what you do, is you strike at them militarily. I mean, I know this is going to sound awful, but my point is, there's only one way to begin to deal with people like this, and that is you have to kill some of them, even if they are not immediately, directly involved in this thing. We do know that the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan has mothered Osama bin Laden for years. They need to be hit. Either they need to be hit, or they need to understand very quickly that they have got to stop supporting terrorism, and then make it evident that they're stopping the terrorism.
So you're not talking about a long, drawn-out investigation as we had with Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie.
I hope not.
A long, drawn-out effort to extradite possible suspects.
I hope not. I hope not, because if that's the case, well, you saw what happened with Pan Am 103. I mean, by the time it was all done, first of all, many people had lost all interest in the subject. This is an act. When they compare this to Pearl Harbor, I don't think they're wrong in the sense that it's a surprise attack. And I suspect, if we are wise about this, Pearl Harbor brought the American people together and made us recognize we had something we had to deal with. Perhaps this will do the same thing for all of us.
All right, former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger.
Can I make one more point? One more
yes,
point
Mr. Secretary, you may.
We need to find out what happened that these planes could be hijacked. That, to me, is the most critical question of all. How was it possible to hijack these aircraft? I thought we had dealt with that problem before. If, in fact, if they had not been hijacked, none of this would have happened.
Well, we did hear just from a fragment of information, Mr. Secretary, reportedly from Barbara Olson, the conservative commentator, the wife of the United States Solicitor General, told her husband and others in a phone call these were men who had hijacked. This was the American Airlines that left Dulles, that these men, as far as she could tell, only had knives and paper or cardboard cutters on them as weapons. We want to thank Secretary Lawrence Eagleburger for joining us. Joey Chen in Atlanta.
Judy, thanks very much. For our viewers who have just been trying to catch up on all the events that have occurred today, I want to bring you first up to date with the latest information on a full detailed TikTok of what has happened in the course of this day. Look at the latest from Ben Wiedemann.
8:45 a.m. in New York. Smoke billows from the World Trade Center after a large passenger plane slammed into the North Tower. Initial reports suggested it was an accident. 9:03, another airliner hits the Trade Center's South Tower, an explosion bursting from the building's upper floors.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center.
President Bush calls the crashes an apparent terrorist attack. 9:45, another hit, a commercial plane crashed to the Pentagon. 9:51. Taking no chances, the Federal Aviation Administration grounds all takeoffs and landings and reroutes incoming international flights to Canada. And the Pentagon soon upgrades its terrorism alert status to Delta, the highest possible level. 10 a.m., back in New York, the Trade Center's South Tower crumbles to the ground. 10:29, the North Tower collapses. These buildings were once the tallest in the world. Lower Manhattan, home to the city's financial district, is shrouded in smoke, dust, and ash. 10:10 a.m., a half hour earlier, United Flight 93, bound from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, crashes into western Pennsylvania. Police there say initial reports suggest there were no survivors. In Washington, the Departments of Justice, State, Treasury, and Defense were among those ordered evacuated, as were the Capitol and the White House. In New York, major businesses and stock exchanges were evacuated. All tunnels and bridges into and out of the city were shut down. The United Nations was evacuated as a precaution. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of people are feared hurt or killed in what is clearly the worst ever terrorist attack on the United States. Ben Wiedemann, CNN.
More perspective now. We turn to Brian Jenkins, who is a counterterrorism expert from Los Angeles this afternoon. Sir, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit. I mean, it cannot escape our attention that the targets struck were in the very seats of U.S. wealth, of U.S. military power, and indeed very symbolic structures. I wonder if you can give us some indication about what the terrorists, what symbol, what signal they're trying to send here.
I think they are trying to send just that signal, and that is their ability to strike at the heart of American power. The Pentagon being the heart of American military power, the World Trade Center being in Lower Manhattan, the heart of the nation's economic power. Both of these structures, the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, in addition being great symbols of these cities, great symbols of America. Their ability to strike those is intended to create alarm and panic throughout the United States.
And in fact, there have been closings of businesses, of schools, of all sorts of things all over the country in the course of this day because of these assaults. I'm wondering if you can give us any of your perspective. Obviously, you don't have a crystal ball to look at these things, but should we regard this as being done at this point? It has been silent for much of the rest of the day since this morning.
One has to be very, very careful looking at a multiple coordinated attack like this to say exactly when it's over. I mean, it was 31 years ago, almost to the day, that in a single day 3 airliners were hijacked. One of the hijackings failed, but the other 2 airliners plus an airliner that was hijacked on the following day were flown to Desert Airfield in Jordan, where the hijackers, members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, held the hostages for a number of days.
All right, Ms. Jenkins, I'm sorry to have to interrupt you here. We do have some late developments. As you see at the bottom of your screen, there are reports from CNN's Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan, of explosions there. I want to get some additional information now. CNN's Aaron Brown from his rooftop vantage point in New York. Oh, and actually, this is Nick Robertson now in Kabul. Nick, what can you tell us out there?
Well, Joey, it's about 2:30 in the morning here in Kabul. We can hear explosions around the perimeter of the city. We're in a position here which gives us a view over the whole city. We just heard an impact perhaps a few miles away. If I listen, you can hear the ripple of explosions around the city. Perhaps we've heard there the sixth explosion. I see gunbursts and starbursts in the air. Tracer fire is coming up out of the city. I hear aircraft flying above the city of Kabul. Perhaps we've heard half a dozen to detonations on the perimeter of the city, some coming from the area close to the airport. I see on the horizon what could be a fire on the horizon, close perhaps to where the airport might be. A flash came up then from the airport. Some ground fire coming up here in Kabul. A lot of flashing, reflecting off clouds towards the horizon here. We thought that might have been a thunderstorm before. The detonations we're hearing now much louder than a thunderstorm. Also detonations similar to those caused by large missiles. I've been in Belgrade and I've been in Baghdad and seen cruise missiles arrive in both those cities. The detonations we're hearing in Kabul right now certainly sound like the detonations of loud missiles that are coming in. We do see tracer fire going up into the air and hear the detonations towards the perimeter of the city, heavy air detonations we can hear now. It's what sounds like a lot of anti-aircraft fire going up, multiple detonations we can hear in the air. I'll try and be quiet for a moment, see if we can pick up some of those sounds coming in from the perimeter of the city, Joey. Very quiet at this particular moment. The city still tracer fire, rockets going up around the airport, tracer fire flying across the city in the direction of the airport. The city at this stage still very well illuminated. The electricity supply is still on in the city, illuminating the city. Detonation coming in from towards the airport. Multiple detonations now going up again towards the perimeter of the city in the direction of the airport. We see one fire on the horizon at this moment. Kabul is surrounded by mountains. The detonations reverberate from those mountains, so it's difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly where the impacts are happening. Certainly, certainly it would appear that the Afghan defense systems have detected a threat in the air. They are launching what appears to be anti-aircraft defense systems at the moment. Certainly I can see that fire that was blazing on the horizon. It was a faint yellow. It's now a bright orange blazing. Several other detonations going off around the city, multiple areas. Rockets appear to be taking off from one end of the airport. I can see that's perhaps located about 8 or 9 miles away from where we stand, Joey.
We want to ask you to please keep your line up to us. We're having difficulty reaching you on another line, but please keep your line up. We can see the pictures coming to us by the video phone. Again, this is very advanced technology that CNN is using, but you will see some of the digital effect. It is not quite as clear as your average television signal, and so to our viewers, we apologize for that. But this is certainly the only video that you're going to get from Kabul, Afghanistan. This point, and you're watching it on CNN. Again, we are hearing from our correspondent Nick Robertson, who's on the scene in Kabul with his team there, and he has reported the sounds of tracer fire. He has reported the fire burning there in Kabul, the seat of Afghanistan's power and the seat of its Taliban government. Again, we are watching their picture coming to us on the video phone, and it is very hard, of course, to see exactly what you're looking at, but you are looking at Kabul. Again, you see some tracer fire there coming across the scene. Nick Robertson, can you?
Yeah, we're being told, Joey, I can hear you if you can hear me. Certainly, big detonation there, missiles flying across the city. We're being told from sources in Kandahar, that's the spiritual capital of Afghanistan, 300 miles south of here, that there is no rocket activity like this south of here in Kandahar. Certainly in Kabul, very, very active at this stage. Multiple detonations. It is nighttime here. It is dark. It is difficult to get an accurate on exactly what we're seeing and exactly what we're hearing. Certainly the sound, what appears to be the sound of large missiles incoming and landing in the city. Certainly a big fire on the horizon of the city at the moment. And certainly anti-aircraft fire coming up from the city and rockets being launched and flying across the horizon of the city. Rockets perhaps going at the speed of several hundred miles an hour, the sort of speed that one might expect to see cruise missiles traveling across the horizon, burning with a white glow coming from their tails rather than a yellow glow. The fire on the horizon that we can see from here burning furiously now. Perhaps it would be accurate at this stage to suspect that was a fuel dump that's been hit by the way that it's burning, flames leaping, and that fuel dump must be perhaps 5 to 8 miles from where I am. Flames leaping up from that fuel dump now leaping up right into the air. It was a low-burning fire before, but it's now really increasing its ferocity, perhaps indicating that it is a fuel dump. Looking across the rest of the city, that fuel dump, perhaps the only big fire we can see at this time. From our vantage point here at the Kabul Intercontinental Hotel that overlooks the whole of the city of Kabul, that is in a basin surrounded by mountains, the whole city is laid out in front of us. The gunfire that was coming up from the city seems to have subsided for now. We're not hearing any more detonations at this moment. And as I say, fire on the horizon really burning furiously at this time, flames leaping way up in the air this moment. Joey?
Nick, if you can talk to us a little bit about your circumstance. It is 6 o'clock in the evening here in Atlanta. It must be quite late at night there in Kabul.
Indeed, 2:30 in the morning here, Joey. We're eight and a half hours ahead of East Coast time in the United States. And it was about 5 hours ago that the Foreign Minister of Afghanistan, Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil, briefed journalists. I hear more detonations going off now. He said that the Taliban had not taken precautions against the possibility of there being an air attack against Afghanistan. He said because it was not necessary. The Taliban spiritual leader Mullah Omar had also made a statement saying that they felt Osama bin Laden wasn't responsible for what had happened in the United States. He said his country was a peaceful country. He wanted it to be at peace, and he wanted other countries around the world. Certainly what we're seeing in Kabul these early hours of this Wednesday morning is very far from peace. Certainly multiple explosions happening in and around the city. There is a front line about 50 miles north of the city where the Taliban are fighting a battle against the Northern Alliance here. We could hear detonations coming from that northern area as well. But on the perimeter of the city, particularly in the direction of the Kabul airport, which is about 5 to 8 miles from where we are, detonations coming from there. I remember standing on this balcony about 4 years ago watching fighter jets bomb that airport as part of Afghanistan's ongoing civil war. The flash at the airport to us hearing the detonation of the hotel is about the same duration, so I am using that as an estimate to gauge that those missiles again are falling in the area of the airport. First we're seeing the flash, and then we hear the detonation some several seconds afterwards, and they appear to be coming from that airport area, in some cases several miles away from us. There is still a lot of flashing we can see in the air reflected off clouds. That could be thunder and lightning. However, there's a possibility that those reflections are missiles landing elsewhere, the flashes as they explode and reflecting off the clouds. But it's not a good indication. We certainly don't hear any detonations coming from that particular direction at this time. The anti-aircraft fire that we were seeing a little while ago is not coming up from the city. The city, apart from the detonations we were hearing a few minutes ago, appears very, very calm. The visibility here is excellent. We can see all the way across the city. It lies on a plain that's surrounded by the mountains here in Kabul. We have high mountains to the right. These mountains were used by the Mujahideen as vantage points for shelling the city several years ago during the Mujahideen infighting in Kabul. The last 5 years, the Taliban have been in control of this city, have been trying to extend their control over and across Afghanistan. And the foreign minister this evening telling journalists and CNN that he didn't believe that Afghanistan would be attacked. He said if Afghanistan was attacked, then they would call it, the Taliban would call it an act of state-sponsored terrorism, Joey.
All right, that is CNN's Nick Robertson. Again, please keep the line open to us. Nick Robertson there in Kabul, Afghanistan. For our viewers who are watching this with us on the air, again, we're getting this from video phone technology. You're seeing this exclusively on CNN. It is a very new technology, and so you tell from the audio line it is not as clear as our typical TV feed, and the visuals obviously are not as clear, but you are looking at the city of Kabul in Afghanistan. This is the seat of the Taliban government there, not its spiritual center, but its government center in any case. You are seeing in just about the last 10 minutes, we have been hearing these reports from CNN correspondent Nick Robertson on the ground in Kabul of an explosion. You see on the right side of your screen, about a third of the way over, the flames of fire. They were quite large just a short time ago. See, simmered down, but again, we're just not seeing very much of this because it's the video phone. Again, Nick Robertson saying that they had seen tracers going up as well. They have been listening and hearing the possibility of additional explosions elsewhere. They're trying to follow that, but it's a little bit hard to tell. Again, it is 2:30 in the morning in Kabul. And Nick Robertson continues to watch there. Now let's turn to Judy Woodruff for us in Washington. Judy.
Joey, we are in the studio in Washington, but of course riveted to these pictures coming out of Kabul, Afghanistan. With me in the studio watching former United States Defense Secretary William Cohen and Republican Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. I want to ask both of you about what's going on. Let me begin with you, Secretary Cohen. Is this something that is likely to be the United States retaliating, which is what I think immediately comes to people's minds?
I think we have to be very cautious in coming to that judgment, Judy. What we're looking at now is the United States gathering information. Obviously, there are many plans and contingency plans that we have to deal with responding to any potential terrorist threat that might be in the offing again. But I think it's very premature to make any judgment on this. This could be part of the civil war that's been raging on for some time, and so I think we have to wait to get more information.
What do you mean part of a civil war?
Well, there's been a civil war raging in Afghanistan for some time now, and this could be simply the factions still carrying on their fighting in Kabul, rather than any kind of an attack being launched by the United States.
Are you saying, Mr. that it's unlikely that the United States would move this quickly? I'm asking that because just a few minutes ago I was interviewing former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, and he said flat out what the United States needs to do is strike against countries like Afghanistan that are harboring terrorists and not wait to find out exactly who was responsible for today's atrocities.
Well, I think we do have to isolate and ostracize those countries like Afghanistan and others who are on the terrorist list who will give safe harbor for terrorists. But I think we have to be a little more judicious rather than simply striking out. We have to get more information, and further strikes might be warranted. But at this point, I think we get all the information, then make a very ice-cold decision in terms of what we need to do to protect the American people and make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I think that may be a bit premature at this point.
Senator Hatch, again, we're stressing we have no idea who's behind these attacks in Kabul, the government center of Afghanistan. But if this were the West, were the United States, would it be appropriate to retaliate so quickly?
Well, we have some information. You know, about a month ago we had information that they were planning on some big strikes, people who were affiliated or associated with bin Laden. Then just today we've intercepted some information where some people who are associated with bin Laden basically said that they had hit 2 targets. So it looks to me like there's increasing evidence, even though it's fragmentary and even though it's not positive, that bin Laden is behind all this. And of course, I first warned the nation in 1996 on Meet the Press that we better get hold of bin Laden or he's going to kill Americans.
We're going to bring back our Nick Robertson there on the ground in, or I should say on top of a building there in Kabul. Nick, you're on. Go.
Well, certainly the fire we were watching on the horizon before, I'd made the assumption that it was an oil depot burning because we've certainly seen flames, a dull yellow fire to a bright orange fire with flames leaping into the sky. I've been informed by my associates here who work with us in Kabul that it's very likely an ammunition dump that we're looking at. They believe an ammunition dump is located in that area. That, of course, would account for some of the explosions that we've been hearing here as ammunition has detonated and gone off from that location, Judy. Yeah. Certainly it's all quiet here in Kabul right now. Certainly no more explosions are being heard around the city. And we certainly believe what we're looking at now is an ammunition dump, the fire at that dump now dying down, and we're hearing no more detonations coming from that dump. Certainly Kabul is within striking range of some of the long-range missiles that the Northern Alliance has and is capable of launching in this direction. And certainly in the past, the Northern Alliance has launched missiles at Kabul. It is not without the realms of possibility that the Northern Alliance could launch missiles at this time. The Northern Alliance in the last couple of days a rather traumatic process of an assassination attempt on its key leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud. Still unconfirmed whether that leader is alive or dead, and certainly there's a ferocity within the internal fighting going on in Afghanistan at this time. One certainly cannot rule out that any missiles falling on the city tonight could be coming from that Northern Alliance.
So, Nick Robertson, just to clarify, you're saying it could well be part of an internal civil war that we see here and not a result of something coming from the West, NATO, the United States?
From our vantage point this evening, we can certainly report a large number of explosions around the city, what appears to be an ammunition dump on fire, a lot of return fire coming up from positions in Kabul. We cannot say from this position at this time exactly where the missiles are coming from, those causing the detonations in and around the city of Kabul. It is possible it's from the Northern Alliance, and of course there is the other possibility that we've been talking about this evening.
And Nick, is this typical of the kind of fire that you've been seeing back and forth in this war that's been going on in Afghanistan? Is this at all typical?
No, one would definitely have to say it's not typical. The strikes on Kabul have been very infrequent over the last few years, very occasional. The Northern Alliance very aware that it's been blamed in the past of many civilian casualties by launching attacks on Kabul. So there have been very few direct attacks on the city. And indeed, the forces of the Northern Alliance are at such a distance back from the city, only long-range, well, medium-range missiles capable of going 30, 40, 50 miles are able to reach the city from their positions. And it's certainly not something that's happened in this city, a barrage of this type, a sustained artillery attack or missile attack of this type in recent years even.
All right, Nick Robertson, we want you to stay connected to us. Let's keep this connection alive. But as we're watching these pictures, let's now go back to New York and to Aaron Brown. Aaron.
Judy, thank you. I'm joined here as well by Paula Zahn. We'll hear her voice in just a moment. As we continue to look at these pictures out of Afghanistan, again, I would remind you that the technology here is it's called a video phone. It is very high-tech and a little bit imperfect, but it is perfect enough so that you can clearly see that fire burning in the distance. What Nick Robertson has described as an ammunition dump, very probably, and you can very clearly see, or we've been very able to see, throughout Nick's reporting, the tracer fire coming up, the anti-aircraft fire coming up.
I think we need to make it clear at this point that no group has claimed responsibility for the multiple attacks today, and yet U.S. intelligence officials confirmed with David Ensor earlier today that they believe a group connected to Osama bin Laden may have been involved. You have talked about this all day long, and I think you've done a very good job of explaining how well financed this would have to have been, how well orchestrated. It begs the question, if not Osama bin Laden, then who?
Then who? Nick, from the very beginning, the Taliban officials, Afghani officials have said we had nothing to do with this, Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with this. How do you hear that? Was there any nuance in the language that sent a different message that maybe the rest of us might not have heard? Well, perhaps we have lost at least the audio portion here. Jamie McIntyre has been outside the Pentagon. Jamie, can you hear us?
I do hear you.
Are you hearing anything from the Pentagon, wherever the Pentagon might literally be right now, or at least officials, about whether there is an American involvement in what we are looking at in Afghanistan?
I have talked to several senior officials, and they've told me they are not of whether or not this is a U.S. military strike, but the most senior officials are in the Pentagon, and in fact several busloads of reporters are being taken over now to the Pentagon briefing room, where we expect shortly Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, flanked by the Republican and Democratic leaders of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Carl Levin and Senator John Warner, to brief us on developments today. And if this is in fact a military strike or part of a U.S. retaliation, we would expect that Secretary Rumsfeld would tell us at that time. Secretary Rumsfeld has been in the Pentagon all day. He went outside briefly to make an inspection tour of the damage behind me. Many casualties here today, but the Pentagon is refusing to give any numbers or even estimates of how many people were killed and injured in this terrorist attack today here at the Pentagon. But again, no confirmation at this point from any of the officials that I've talked to about whether what we're seeing in Afghanistan is part of a U.S. military retaliation.
Jamie, just to make sure that I've heard this correctly, no one is saying yes it is, but no one has said to you no it's not either, have they?
No, no one has steered us away from it. They've the officials who have been over here with the press, and we're just about half a mile or so from the Pentagon, simply said that they had not been briefed and were not aware of this action when we told them that CNN was reporting explosions in Kabul. So. But again, several officials speculated that if this were the case, that explain the reason for Secretary Rumsfeld's appearance. And of course, being flanked by the bipartisan support of Congress is clearly designed to send the message that there may be squabbles between the Pentagon and Congress, but when it comes to something like this, there's absolute unanimity. That may also account for the reason that despite the damage to the Pentagon, that they want to hold this event in the Pentagon briefing room, which is on the other side of the building, which was not damaged by the plane crash into the side of the building, in order to show a portrait to the world that the United States military headquarters is still up and functioning, and that the United States is still capable of reaching out and touching its enemies.
All right, thank you very much, Jamie. Right now, we're going to have Senator Orrin Hatch join us to provide some insights as to what might be going on. Senator Hatch, I don't know how much of our coverage you've been listening to, but there seems to be a conflict of opinion as to whether we would be capable of pulling off this kind of attack if indeed that is what we are witnessing. What do you suspect is going on in Afghanistan right now?
Well, let's understand we're capable of pulling it off if that's what it is, but it's probably more likely the followers of Shah Massoud, who was deliberately bombed just yesterday and who was seriously injured, if not killed. Now, his representatives say he was injured, but he's all right, but there is some indication that he may have died in the attack, and he was, of course, the opposition to the Taliban over in Afghanistan, so it's a very serious situation over there as well.
But what about what former Secretary of Defense William Cohen just mentioned? that you would want to know who actually carried off these attacks before you planned any kind of retaliatory strike if this is not a result of some conflict within Afghanistan?
Well, I agree with Secretary Cohen. We have to be very cautious. On the other hand, I thought Secretary Eagleburger was very honest when he said that, look, the Taliban have been harboring Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden has said that it is the duty of every Muslim to kill Americans. There's every indication that he has been behind the attacks against American installations, and we happen to know just today that we've got information that indicates that representatives who are affiliated with Osama bin Laden were actually saying over the airwaves that, the private airwaves at that they had hit 2 targets. If you go back to the Millennium problem scare that we had before the year 2000, Osama bin Laden was of all of that, and the people associated with him and affiliated with him was in the middle of that. So this is a very serious situation. So they should not be harboring this criminal, and we've got to, it seems to me, go after him. And it does look, although the evidence is fragmentary, as though he's had a major role in what's happened here today.
Secretary Cohen, are you as convinced as Senator Hatch is that Osama bin Laden played some role in this tragedy here today?
I think if you were to cast the searchlight of probability on these footprints, they would lead to Osama bin Laden, but I still think that we have to get more evidence. This is not evidence that you would need in the prosecution of a criminal act. I distinguish between terrorism and a criminal act. And so I would think you just need more evidence than we have right now, but it doesn't have to be something you can use in a court of law. I think that the probability is it points to Osama bin Laden himself or the groups that he supports, and therefore I think we ought to keep our focus very much on him but not exclude others. And so I think a little more time is necessary. I don't disagree with Secretary Eagleburger that we need to respond swiftly and very strongly to those who have inflicted this great tragedy upon the American people.
Secretary Cohen, it's Aaron Brown. We have heard in a number of conversations that we've had today that the United States needs to be more aggressive or more proactive in its counterterrorism efforts, that you can't wait until something has happened, that you have to stop it before, and it may be that some innocent will suffer because of it. That's a political problem, isn't it?
It is, and the thing we have to keep in mind is we do not want to allow terrorists to strike such terror in the hearts of the American people that we become like them, that we become indifferent to how many innocent people that we might kill. That is what separates us from terrorism and from the terrorists. We have a higher standard. So we have to be very careful in how we respond and how we take action against those who are planning further acts of terrorism against the American people, so that we don't become drawn down into that level of evil that they have perpetrated. So that's what distinguishes the American people and our ideals, and we ought to adhere to those.
And Senator Hatch, you think that the political equation on how the United States deals with this has changed because of what's happened today?
No question about it. We can't take this kind of action without a very heavy response. And we have some information. It may be fragmentary, but the fact is we have some information that indicates that that Osama bin Laden and many of his affiliates and associates, he's certainly the motivating force behind these people. He certainly has the money, and he certainly has the ability to motivate antagonistic forces against the United States, and he said he wants to do that. So it looks very much like that, although we're not absolutely certain at this point.
But Senator, what Secretary Eagleburger said a little while ago, others have said, is not that we, as a country, the United States responds all the time, that at some point it needs to take a proactive, it needs to strike before the attack itself, before the terrorist attack. And if some innocents are hurt, if mistakes get made, that is an unfortunate reality. Has that's a political problem, and I want to know, I guess, from you, if you think the country which has been reluctant to do that will be less so because of today.
Well, this is an act of war. As far as I'm concerned, war's been declared against the United States. We ought to act accordingly, and we should have a very stiff response to that. And to be honest with you, it looks to me as though what's happened in New York, just think about it. There must be thousands of people killed here, probably more than at Pearl Harbor by far. And there is evidence, there's indication that there were people who have been affiliated with Osama bin Laden whose communications have been intercepted that basically have said they got 2 targets. There's a lot of other information that is coming forward, although it's fragmentary and nobody can absolutely be guaranteed in the surety of it, but we all know that Osama bin Laden is doing everything he can to antagonize American forces, to try and hit against Americans. He's called for the death of Americans, and we ought to respond forcibly.
General Wesley Clark was a guest earlier today on CNN, and he began to express what most would interpret as a sense of outrage that we didn't know this was about to happen. There is a feeling that perhaps even during the last administration, too much emphasis was put on technical intelligence and not human intelligence.
Well, you got that right.
Do you buy that analysis?
Well, I surely do. As a matter of fact, we haven't been putting enough money in to the intelligence community, and we certainly haven't been putting enough human on the ground. That means human intelligence on the ground. And we've got to start doing that. We've got to do a lot of other things. I reported last Sunday with Wolf Blitzer here that it's amazing, with all of the economic difficulties that they have, that the Russians have a better tactical fighter than we do, that it's more maneuverable, it is faster, and our pilots can fly it better than our F-15, which is becoming quite old, and we've been allowing our military to deteriorate. But not only that, our intelligence, we haven't been beefing it up like we should, and we know that terrorism is a reality out there, especially against the United States, and we also know many of the people who are doing it. And the people who are excited about this over in the Middle East, who are dancing in the streets, who are making fun of the United States, we ought to remember who they are, because they're enemies of our country.
All right, Aaron and I would like to come back to you, Senator Hatch and Secretary Cohen. Right now, though, we're going to go back to Kabul, Afghanistan, where Nick Robertson has an update for us. Nick?
Well, I think if we what we've been watching here in the last half an hour or so, we heard, first of all, aircraft coming in, then detonations around the city, then the fire, and more detonations coming from what was we're told is an ammunition dump. We also fold into that the information we've been given here that 300 miles south of here, in the spiritual heartland of the Taliban, their city of Kandahar, where their leader Mullah Omar lives, no reports of any detonations there. That city well beyond the range of the Northern Alliance forces. Certainly the Northern Alliance forces, their commander, their key and pivotal commander, enemy number one of the Taliban, in fact, Ahmed Shah Massoud, attacked in a suicide attack on Sunday. Certainly the Northern Alliance in a position right now to be feeling very, very aggrieved with the Taliban, and certainly very much in a mood for taking the battle to them on their terms. So looking across the city of Kabul now, it is very quiet, just barking, the fire from the ammunition dump continuing to burn on the horizon. But evaluating everything we've seen here this evening, what we could have heard was some of Massoud's Northern Alliance jets flying in here. This is something that they do very occasionally. Certainly the Northern Alliance very aggrieved at this stage. And then detonations and anti-aircraft fire coming up at the same time. Again, from our vantage point here over the city, very difficult to tell those details, to tell whose aircraft they were, how many detonations there were, whether they were all missiles from aircraft. Details like that, very difficult to tell at night. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning here. We expect to get a clearer idea, perhaps as daylight comes upon the city in 3 or 4 hours. The Northern Alliance holds about 5% of the territory of Afghanistan. They've been holding out against the Taliban now for the last 5 years, since the Taliban took control of this city, Kabul, in September 1996. Ahmed Shah Massoud, a key pivotal commander, he earned his military stripes, if you will, and earned the respect of many commanders in Afghanistan during the 1980 Soviet occupation. For 10 years he held out and was undefeated against the Soviet Union forces here in Afghanistan during the 1980s. He was a pivotal commander, the defense minister of a power-sharing government here in the early 1990s, driven out by the Taliban in 1996. Has been fighting from the northeast of Afghanistan on an ever decreasingly small patch of land, and the assassination attempts on him at the weekend blamed by Massoud's forces. Yeah.
I need to interrupt you for just a second. CNN's Wolf Blitzer in Washington has been doing some reporting on the president's activities. Wolf, join us.
Thank you, Aaron. We've now been told by Ari Fleischer, the White House press secretary, telling the pool of reporters always accompanying the president on his way back to Washington, that the explosions that we heard in Kabul, Afghanistan, were not part of the U.S. retaliatory strike. Once again, repeating, the explosions that Nick Robertson has just been reporting about in Kabul, not part of any U.S. military strike, clearly indicating this is part of the continuing civil war that's been underway in Afghanistan now for some time. The president is on his way back to Andrews Air Force Base right outside of Washington. We're told that Air Force One is expected to land in about 15 minutes. We're also told it's being flanked by 3 U.S. Air Force fighters. It's 2 F-15s, 1 F-16, a remarkable situation, a remarkable development. All of my years covering the White House, I don't remember ever Air Force One returning to Andrews Air Force Base with protective cover by fighter jets. The president, as you know, is expected to address the nation around 9 p.m. this evening. But before the president speaks, there are 2 briefings that we're standing by awaiting. First of all, the Attorney General John Ashcroft will be briefing at the White House, and the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld will be briefing at the Pentagon. Of course, we will be bringing you all of those briefings live here on CNN. So just once again, to recap, the White House, through the press secretary, Ari Fleischer, insisting that those explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan, not the result of U.S. military action. Paula and Aaron in New York.
Well, thank you. It is a reminder to us here, to all of you as well, that we need to be careful about what we assume as we go on here. There are a lot of reasons why things happen. It's not always the first thing you think about. There are certain things we know that have happened, and we know that just after 8:45 this morning, 8:48, the first of the planes hit the Trade Center. It was shortly after that, 9:08 if memory serves me, and it's been a while now, that the second plane hit. We have seen this now from a couple of different views, and we have found one more to show you of the second hit of the Trade Center. People out with video cameras this morning, and if we can roll the tape and maybe take a look at it a couple of times as we orient ourselves, we're seeing it for the first time as well. There's the plane, you can't miss that.
Holy shit!
Well, it's hard to quarrel with the expletive. You know, we have seen this now. We have seen this, honestly, dozens of times, and it's no less powerful and no less sickening to see it again. Again, let's just look at this scene. This is amateur video, the plane coming, and now no words, no reason.
I think we all have struggled today with a way to define just the impact of what was witnessed here in New York. As you know, Aaron, this is 30 blocks away. As you know, the city is in a state of paralysis at the moment, although I am told that some of the bridges now are beginning to be opened up for outbound traffic. But at a point in the city today, people were trying to be evacuated from the south end of New York City. It was extremely difficult. You were up here, and I was down on the street watching tens of thousands of people making their way on foot to get out of the city. Now, one of the things that we've witnessed within the last hour was the collapse of Tower Number 7, which is part of the World Trade Center complex as well. As you know, Aaron, because you've been reporting this all day, this has been on fire most of the day. This was expected to happen.
47 stories, not nearly as big as the 2 towers which once stood behind us, but a small building with 47 stories.
Now, from what we're hearing on the street, rescue workers are still having a very difficult time getting into the perimeter area surrounding this site because of falling debris. City officials still cannot confirm for us at this point how many people have been injured, how many people have been killed. Just before I got on the air, I spoke with someone from the department that deals with rescue operations for the city. This is all speculation on his part, but he has reasonably good information from various hospitals. He suspects those numbers could rise into the thousands. So, Aaron, we're going to leave you right now, and we're going to check back in with Bill Hemmer, who joins us now from Atlanta with another part of this story. Bill?
Paula, Aaron, thank you. I'm Bill Hemmer, live in Atlanta, continuing CNN's coverage of America under attack. Some 9 hours now after terrorists hijacked airliners and crashed them into U.S. buildings. Some kind of attack, as we mentioned, was taking place in Afghanistan, but a Wolf Blitzer was reporting there. As we see the videotape by way of video phone in Kabul, Afghanistan's capital, Ari with the White House indicates this is not a retaliatory strike. However, this appears to be the ongoing civil war battle that's taking place in Afghanistan. Also, reporters traveling with President Bush have also been told these explosions, again, not part of that U.S. strike at any country at this time. Earlier, U.S. intelligence officials had told CNN there are good indications that persons linked to fugitive terrorist Osama bin Laden may be responsible for a number of terrorist attacks in the U.S. today. Bin Laden is suspected to be hiding out in Afghanistan, and earlier in Kabul, Afghanistan's foreign minister country does not allow Osama bin Laden to use Afghan territory to launch any attack on any government around the world. Now, the explosions again in Afghanistan come as we still await the first official estimates of the casualties on what has been a deadly day of terrorist attacks here in the U.S. Both towers of New York's World Trade Center and a section of the Pentagon were destroyed when hijacked airliners were deliberately crashed into buildings there. Rescue officials predict that hundreds, if not thousands, have died in attacks. One tower, the World Trade Center, was hit at 8:48 a.m. East Coast time this morning. Officials believe it was hit by an American Airlines Boeing 767 flying from Boston to L.A. The hijacked plane, Flight 11, had 81 passengers, 9 crew members, and 2 pilots on board. About 18 minutes later, as emergency crews were rushing to the scene, a second airliner flew into the other tower, the World Trade Center. Officials believe this hijacked plane was United Airlines Flight 175, again from Boston to L.A., with 56 passengers on board, 2 pilots, and 7 crew members. About 10 a.m. Eastern Time, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. By then, authorities had closed down the tunnels and bridges leading into the island of Manhattan, and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, had ordered all U.S. airports closed. The North Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed at 10:29 a.m. New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, while not speculating on the final death toll, has told reporters it may be, quote, more than any of us can bear, end quote. Rescue crews still on the scene. A smaller building, part of the World Trade Center complex, collapsed this afternoon. That's building number 7, part of a larger complex connected to the World Trade Center. The National Guard mobilizing all troops in the New York City area, but New York's tragedy only part of that story. As we look at other parts of the country now, and specifically in Washington, D.C., I'm told Wolf Blitzer now with more information from our nation's capital. Wolf, what do you have for us now?
Bill, right now we're told that Air Force One has landed at nearby Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington in Maryland. The President's Air Force One being escorted in by 3 fighter jets, 2 F-15s, 1 F-16. Close by, very often there are some Air Force jets who go up to bring down, to help escort Air Force One down. But this time these planes, were told, the fighter jets were much closer to Air Force One. The President will be returning to the White House to address the nation later this evening around 9 p.m. Eastern. But in advance of that, several we're standing by. We're waiting for a congressional briefing that will occur, the congressional leadership, around 7:30 p.m. Eastern. There will be a briefing from the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, over at the White House. We're also standing by awaiting a briefing from the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. Meanwhile, let's take a look back at some of the sights and sounds of this remarkable day of terror.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind the car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help. I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm seeing a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you.
The Pentagon briefing is now underway. Here's the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. Unfortunately, we're having some audio problems from the Defense Secretary. We're going to try to fix that. In the meantime, Orrin Hatch is standing by. Senator Hatch, you're a member of the Intelligence Committee. You're not surprised that the bombings that we heard about, the explosions in Kabul, were not the result of U.S. military action?
No, I'm not surprised because just yesterday, and it looks like it's tied together, Osama bin Laden forces attacked Shah Massoud, who is their enemy in the north and who is also 12 tribal leaders.
Senator, I think we've fixed the audio with Secretary Rumsfeld at the Pentagon. He's briefing reporters. Let's listen.
Offering their sympathy and indeed their assistance in various ways. I'm very pleased to be joined here by Chairman Carl Levin and Senator John Warner. Senator Warner called earlier today and offered support and was kind enough to come down and has been with us. We've very recently had a discussion with the President of the United States. Chairman Hugh Shelton has just landed from Europe. Secretary of the Army, Tom White, who has a responsibility for incidents like this as executive agent for the Department of Defense, is also joining me. It's an indication that the United States government is functioning in the face of this terrible act against our country. I should add that the briefing here is taking place in the Pentagon. The Pentagon's functioning. It'll be in business tomorrow. I know the interest in casualty figures, and all I can say is it's not possible to have solid casualty figures at this time. And the various components are doing roster checks, and we'll have information at some point in the future, and as quickly as it's possible to have it, it will certainly be made available to each of you. I'll be happy to take a few questions after asking first General Shelton if he would like to say anything, and then we will allow the others to make a remark or two.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people, acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks, and matched only by our unity to track down, root out, and relentlessly pursue terrorists, states that support them, and harbor them. They are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institutions are strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator John Warner.
Thank you. As a past chairman preceding Carl Levin, I can assure you that the Congress stands behind our president, and the president speaks with one voice for this entire nation. This is indeed the most tragic hour in America's history, and yet I think it can be its finest hour, as our president and those with him, most notably our Secretary of Defense, our chairman, and the men and women of the armed forces all over this world stand ready not only to defend this nation and our allies against further attack, but to take such action as are directed in the future in retaliation for this terrorist act, a series of terrorist acts unprecedented in world history. We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all, and we're in this together. The United States has borne the brunt, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack. Again, I commend the Secretary, the Chairman, and how proud we are. We spoke with our President here moments ago. He's got a firm grip on this situation, and the Secretary and the General have a firm grip on our armed forces and in communication of the world over.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions and then we'll adjourn. Charlie.
Mr. Secretary, did you have any inkling at all in any way that something of this nature and something of this scope might be planned?
Charlie, we don't discuss intelligence matters.
I see. And how would you respond if you find out who did this?
Obviously, the President of the United States has spoken on that subject, and those are issues that he will address in good time.
Mr. Yes. Secretary, we are getting reports from CNN and others that there are bombs exploding in Kabul, Afghanistan. Are we at the moment striking back, and if so, is the target Osama bin Laden and his organization?
I've seen those reports. In no way is the United States government connected to those explosions.
What about Osama bin Laden? Do you suspect him as the prime suspect in this?
It's not the time for discussions like that.
Mr. Secretary, you said you could not be specific about casualties. Can you give us some characterization of whether it's dozens or hundreds in the building?
Well, we know there were large number, many dozens in the aircraft that flew at full power, steering directly into between, I think, the first and second floor of the opposite the helipad. You've seen it. There cannot be any survivors. It just would be beyond comprehension. There are a number of people that they've not identified by name, but identified as being dead, and there are a number of casualties. But the FBI has secured the site, and the information takes time to come. People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us what you saw? Mr. Secretary, do you consider what happened today
We're looking also at a picture while we listen to the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld of helicopters that we believe are returning to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. Marine One is the helicopter that has the president on board and lands on the south lawn of the White House, which is the routine procedure when the president returns to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. These are helicopters that we're now seeing approaching the south lawn of the White House. That's a picture of downtown Washington that you're seeing right now. President Bush just landing only a few minutes ago at Andrews Air Force Base, returning to the White House, getting ready to address the nation around 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. Once again, Marine Corps helicopters that we believe are one of them carrying the president and his party returning to the south lawn of the White House. There are 6 helicopters there altogether, 6 Marine Corps helicopters.
The people who work in this building do so voluntarily. They're brave people, and they do their jobs well.
Mr. Secretary, can you give a sense of what happened? What did you see when you left your office, ran down to the site, and apparently helped people on stretchers and then returned to the command center?
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building, went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured, most of which were alive and moving, but seriously injured. And a lot of volunteers were doing a terrific job helping bring them out of the buildings and get them into stretchers and into ambulances and into airlifts.
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us how many of the dead were soldiers and how many were civilians? Have you been able to determine that?
Absolutely not. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, today we saw military planes both in New York and in Washington. How much more of a military presence will we see now that this incident has occurred for the next week?
Those kinds of decisions are made day to day. It is correct that we had aircraft flying protective missions at various places in the United States today, and they will do that as appropriate.
Mr. Secretary, what do you say to the American people who may have questions on how something so coordinated has been carried out against this nation? What do you say to them who might not have confidence that our intelligence and our security are what they should be?
I say to them that the President of the United States will be making some remarks to them this evening that will address those subjects.
Mr. Secretary, you've declared, the Pentagon has declared a threat to forces around the world. Could you tell me why? Have you received any threats, or has anyone claimed credit for this?
We have, in fact, declared Force Protection Condition Delta and a condition of high alert, indeed the highest alert. We did so almost immediately upon the attacks, and it is still in force.
Secretary, were there threats issued against other U.S. facilities elsewhere in the world today?
I don't know that there's a day that's gone by since I've been in this job that there haven't been threats somewhere in the world to some facility somewhere. It's one of the complexities of the intelligence business that you have to sort through those kinds of things. But we don't get into the specifics. Yes. You had your hand up? Yes.
So, Mr. Secretary, rumors earlier in the day...
Let me interrupt the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, to report that this is, we believe, Marine One, the President's helicopter, now landing on the south lawn of the White House, which is the usual procedure, bringing President Bush back to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. The President began this day in Sarasota, Florida, where he was going to be promoting his agenda on education, then flew to Louisiana, then flew to Nebraska, and finally, when the Secret Service and U.S. law enforcement thought it was safe, now bringing him back to the White House, where later this evening he will be addressing the nation. Air Force One about to touch down on the south lawn of the White House. John King, our senior White House correspondent, is standing by. John, what do you have over there?
Wolf, as you watch Marine One land here on the south lawn, we have just been allowed back into the White House. We were evacuated as well earlier today. First, let me read you a statement from the President. This during his travels back to Washington. The President telling his National Security Council, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. We will do what it takes. No one is going to diminish the spirit of this country. Now, the president will return to the White House. One of our cameramen, Mike Bannigan, also just a short time ago shot pictures of Laura Bush coming back to the White House in her motorcade. We do not know where she was, being kept in a secure location at this time, but the First Lady is also back in the White House. Also, after Secretary Rumsfeld finishes his briefing at the Pentagon, a number of Bush administration cabinet officials will brief here at the White House to bring us up to date activities of their agencies. One, we're told, the Health and Human Service Secretary Tommy Thompson, who is involved, of course, in the medical help, blood banking and others, so he will bring us up to date on his agency. Attorney General John Ashcroft also on his way to the White House as well, we are told. All of this leading up, all these briefings from administration cabinet members leading up to a nationally televised address from the president tonight to the American people from the Oval Office. You see there Marine One sitting on the south lawn of the White House, a virtual ghost town throughout much of the day as it was evacuated. The president now back in Washington and at the White House. Wolf.
John, the trips to Louisiana and Nebraska that the president took today, that was designed, we're told, and we see a Marine officer walking off Marine One as the president, we expect to emerge from Marine One any second now. We assume that was because security personnel thought it was too dangerous for the president to come right back to Washington. Is that right?
The first stop at Barksdale in Louisiana was designed so the president could get to a command and control center that is fortified and structured so that he could be in contact. You see the president there emerging from Marine One, saluting his Marine escort on the south lawn of the White House. The direction he turned, it appears he is heading straight into the Oval Office. Had he gone straight, that is the path into the White House residence. The president turning left, indicating he will go straight into his office, the Oval Office. The president saying nothing as he walks by there. The first stop was to get him to a command and control facility so that he could have secure conversations with the vice president, who is here at the White House, and with the National Security Council. At that point, we had been led to believe by some sources the president would go directly back to Washington. Then they took him to the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command for another briefing with the National Security Council amid some concerns that they wanted to run a few more security checks before bringing the president back to Washington. Obviously, one of the heinous acts we saw today on the Pentagon just a few miles away, so an enormous amount of security concerns. Even as we speak here on the grounds of the White House, you see the president here heading up into the path, being greeted by more agents and his senior staff into the Oval Office. Wolf.
And as he goes into the Oval Office in the West Wing of the White House, again, John, for some of our viewers who may just be tuning in right now, read to us the statement that the president has just released.
This is a statement from the president. This is a statement, we are told by pool reporters, that he gave to his National Security Council, quoting the president, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. We will do what it takes. No one is going to diminish the spirit of this country." We expect a statement very much like that to be included in the nationally televised address the president delivers to the American people tonight. He is meeting right now in the Oval Office with advisors to be brought up to date on the latest casualty figures, the latest information the federal government has on just what took place. The administration has also taken one of the steps, Wolf, that seems routine in some ways. Again, a reminder of the tragedy of this day, though issuing a statement just a short time ago declaring the state of New York a major disaster area. Wolf.
And John, security, I take it at the White House, is extraordinary right now under normal circumstances. You don't see the security personnel that we're obviously seeing right now. Is that right?
That is correct. More security on the grounds, more security out in public. Uniformed Secret Service, snipers on the buildings all around the compound here. Remember, this compound, the president was not here at the time, but the vice president was, evacuated this morning when all of this was taking place, when the threat on the Pentagon was taking place. Now they're just now letting people back in. We are, I believe, the first reporters to broadcast live from here. Others just getting into the compound now. The security all day long, we were just across the street watching the dogs, the bomb-sniffing dogs out on the compound. Agents at one point patrolling across the street in Lafayette Park with automatic rifles. That an extraordinary scene. We occasionally have bomb scares here. There are occasionally other threats, security threats that cause high level of alerts. Nothing in my 4+ years on this beat, nothing at all like this today. Wolf.
Okay, John King, we'll be back to you. Stand by. Meanwhile, let's go back to Bill Hemmer in Atlanta. Bill?
Well, thank you, and to our viewers who are just joining us possibly at this time, what has been a very already long and horrendous day in the U.S. We're going to quickly recap the developments of this day. It began with a series of coordinated terrorist attacks against the U.S. Then at the top of this hour, less than 60 minutes ago, explosions were seen in Kabul. That's the capital city in Afghanistan. However, reporters traveling with the president and the White House also tells us these explosions are not part of a U.S. strike against the country. Afghanistan's Taliban has been harboring fugitive terrorist Osama bin Laden. U.S. intelligence officials have told CNN there are good indications that persons linked to Osama bin Laden may be responsible for today's terrorist attacks in the U.S. However, that is far from confirmed at this point. Both towers of New York's World Trade Center, a section of the Pentagon, have been destroyed. At this time, Nick Robertson by video phone joins us from Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan. Nick, what do you have for us at this point?
Well, Bill, we can confirm that the Northern Alliance, that's the alliance of fighters fighting the Taliban, who hold the last 5% of the country in the northeast of Afghanistan that the Taliban have yet to conquer, they have confirmed to us from their spokesman up there in the north of Afghanistan that they were responsible for the explosions here in Kabul this evening. They also say that they plan more such attacks. They don't say where and they don't say when. They say that they will brief us shortly on that, but they are claiming responsibility for the attacks we've seen here in Kabul this evening. It's not normal for them to attack Kabul in this way, but their leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud, a very key commander who holds together the alliance of fighters in the north of Afghanistan, he rose to fame during the Soviet occupation in the 1980s, where he was undefeated.
All right, clearly we have a breakup of our video signal there from Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan. What you're seeing, though, as the video phone, late technology allows us to see these nighttime pictures here. It's not nearly as clear as a regular television monitor would provide, but we can see the images of a quieter capital city of Kabul, and Nick Robertson's audio clearly has dropped off at this point. We hope to reestablish the signal again. It's almost 3 o'clock in the morning in Afghanistan, but back in New York it's just about 7 o'clock, and again we're about 10 hours removed from what has been a day that will live for a long time in the memories of a lot of Americans who have watched the images throughout the day. Back to New York City, the island of Manhattan, and CNN's Paula Zahn. Paula.
Thank you so much, Bill. And as you just said, even though we're 10 hours out, you can see behind me the remnants of the fire still coming from that area where 2 commercial hijacked jets rammed into Tower 1 and Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. Within the past hour, building number 7, which is also attached to that area, collapsed. As you might remember earlier in the day, Tower number 1 and 2 collapsed, the South and North Tower. We are now being told by officials that the Marriott Hotel, which is in the vicinity of this area, is also in the position of being so degraded it might collapse as well. Just to bring you up to date on what we're facing in New York City right now, a lot of folks got trapped here this morning when a lot of public transportation shut down. We are now told that some of the outbound bridges are now opened up for people to leave the city. We can confirm now that the nation's airports have been completely shut down at least until noon tomorrow. Some conflicting information on that. Another report suggests that those flights might be postponed indefinitely. Before I give you any more details on New York City, I'd like to check in with Robert Gates right now, who is the former director of the CIA. Mr. Gates, are you with me?
I am indeed.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
I'm having trouble hearing Mr. Gates. Let me see if we can make a little adjustment with our audio. As we try to straighten that out, we should probably point out that city officials at this point still will not confirm how many injuries there are, how many fatalities. Secretary Rumsfeld also saying the Pentagon is not in a position to share those numbers with us as well. Mr. Gates, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. I'm glad you can hear me, sir. In the last news conference that we just watched, Secretary Rumsfeld would not confirm if the Pentagon had any indication of an impending attack. He said he could not divulge that intelligence information tonight. Do you think the Pentagon had any sort of forewarning?
I'm in no position to know whether there was any kind of warning provided. What we often have, though, in these, with dealing with terrorist threats in the 1980s and in the 1970s is information of some kind of an impending operation, but without the kind of detail that would allow you to prepare or to defend. We ran into that with the attack on the Marine barracks in Lebanon in the early 80s and so on. So there might have been some kind of a general warning, or there may have been a specific warning, but often you get the kind of information that allows you to say something is coming, but without the kind of detail that allows people to take specific actions.
Sir, I don't know whether you would agree with this assessment, but the feeling I got in the street this afternoon that the sense of shock could quickly turn to a sense of outrage. Why weren't we better prepared, or why wasn't the United States better prepared for this kind of attack?
I think we have to bear in mind, even against the background of this catastrophe today, that the FBI and CIA have thwarted some very major terrorist operations against the United States in recent years. They've had some very important successes and saved a lot of lives. I think that there will be a time when all of this, when things have settled down, when people will be looking at what happened, what information was available, what was not available, and making some judgments about whether remedial actions need to be taken. But I think it's way too soon to begin making assumptions about some of those things.
Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi has just called the incident horrifying, calling on Muslims to help. How do you interpret that statement?
Well, my guess is that there are an awful lot of people around the world that are pretty frightened right now about what the United States is going to do. As you said, this sense of horror is likely to turn to a sense of outrage, and I think the rest of the world, and particularly people that in the past have supported terrorists and given them a safe harbor, and helped them in some way, are probably quite worried at this point about what may be coming against them.
All right. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, Mr. Gates, because we need to go back to Wolf Blitzer. We're going to get back to you later on this evening. Wolf Blitzer joins us now back from the Washington Bureau. Wolf.
Thank you very much, Paula. And we want to go right to Jamie McIntyre, our military affairs correspondent. He's standing outside the Pentagon, which, of course, took a huge blast today, a big attack at the Pentagon. Jamie, tell us, first of all, the headline from what the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said at this briefing that we just heard.
Well, probably the headline is what he didn't say, which is what the United States will do next, except to hint that the U.S. has firm resolve in this matter. Perhaps the biggest hint coming from Joint Chiefs Chairman General Hugh Shelton, who said he doesn't want to talk about what's going to happen next, but he said to the American public, rest assured, make no mistake, your armed forces are ready. So the United States clearly hinting that they are willing to take military action as soon as they can determine who is responsible for hijacking these planes and then crashing them into these buildings. Here at the Pentagon, the building is still smoldering, but the Pentagon, the head of the incident command team says that they believe they have the fire contained. It's not yet under control, and they think that they'll have the fire under control shortly. Secretary Rumsfeld vowed that the building would be open for business tomorrow. He's talking about, of course, the other side of the building where his offices are located, where the Pentagon briefing room is located. And the Pentagon wanted to make a point tonight of having Rumsfeld in the briefing room to show that the U.S. government and the headquarters of the U.S. military is operating. And he was flanked with bipartisan support from Capitol Hill, the leading Democrat and Republicans from the Senate Armed Services Committee there to show support that the United States, when attacked, has no divisions in its political will. Again, the Pentagon will not comment on how many there are here. We know that there are probably at least 100, perhaps more. Incident teams, special urban rescue teams from the neighboring counties around here have been brought in to help sift through the rubble and look for survivors, despite the fact that when you have a smoky fire like this, it's almost impossible for people to survive. The rescuers say that they still have hope, that in these cases there still can be people trapped in areas perhaps where there was some air where they could survive, and they will not be giving up hope as they go through all of this wreckage. Wolf?
Jamie, and just to recap, the devastation at the Pentagon, at that corridor at the Pentagon, several corridors, indeed the result of a hijacked American Airlines flight, Flight 77 from Washington Dulles Airport, scheduled to fly to Los Angeles International, hijacked and flown from Dulles Airport, which is about 15 to 20 miles or so from the Pentagon, crashing into the Pentagon, causing that devastation. Did we get any hard numbers killed and injured in the attack?
No, the Pentagon is absolutely refusing to even speculate, even though we know the numbers are fairly high. For instance, we know that there were 65 people on that plane. We know they all perished. We know that there are people in those offices that were right in an area of the Pentagon that had just been renovated, part of the multi-billion-dollar renovation here at the Pentagon. We know there have been bodies taken out. In fact, Rumsfeld made a comment at one point that he wasn't talk about what comes next while they're still removing bodies from the Pentagon, but apparently in an effort to just stop any speculation about it, they're just not giving any numbers out here on the killed and on the injured.
All right, Jamie, stand by. We're standing by for a briefing at the White House with cabinet members who will brief on the U.S. response, the emergency response that is obviously underway in New York and here in Washington. You're taking a look at a picture of the White House briefing room. We're expecting Joe Alba, the FEMA director, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson, and the Attorney General, John Ashcroft. In the meantime, let's bring in Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska. He's a Republican. He's a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. You've been briefed on what's going on. What's your initial assessment, Senator Hagel, about who may have been responsible for this coordinated attack?
We don't know. We will untangle this mess. We will get the facts, and we will respond.
All right, stand by. Senator Hagel, stand by. We've got a technical problem with your microphone. We're going to fix it. The former CIA director, Mr. Jim Woolsey, is here as well, and he's joining us. You've been looking into this, discussing this with some of your former colleagues over in the intelligence community. What do you hear about those who may have been responsible?
Wolf, no one really knows right now, but I do think the following. It's clear now, as it was on December 7th, 1941, the United States is at war. The question is with whom? In December of 41 we knew. Today we really don't. And now one of the reasons we don't is because when the World Trade Center was attacked in 1993, the Clinton administration had a very fine FBI agent in charge of the investigation, Jim Fox. And he had strong suspicions that the Iraqi government might have been behind that terrorist operation. He was relieved. He died a few years later. It was never really checked out thoroughly and effectively. But there are a number of people who have strong suspicions that Randall Yusuf may, who is in prison for the bombing out in Colorado, may have had strong ties to the Iraqi government. Now, if that had been checked out at the time, we might know more now than we do. It's at least interesting that Yusuf was behind two plots, the one to bomb the World Trade Center and the other to blow up a number of American airliners in the Pacific, the one that he was caught while trying to perpetrate in 94, 95. This plot that was hatched today, in a way, is a kind of a combination of the earlier two Yusuf plots. I think we need to very carefully look at all of the history of these terrorist operations and every shred of evidence that we may have on this one and see if there's any chance there was state involvement behind it, because indignation and action is not enough. We need to have indignation and action at the real perpetrators, and as yet we just don't know who those are.
Mr. Woolsey, stand by. I want to try to bring back Senator Hagel, who's also here in our Washington bureau. The former CIA director, Mr. Woolsey, suggesting that perhaps all the finger-pointing, direct finger-pointing that we've heard through much of today toward Osama bin Laden may be premature. Maybe others could have been involved, specifically the Iraqi government. What do you hear?
Well, we must not rule anything out here as possibilities. We do know something, I think, for certain here, Wolf, and that is this was a very sophisticated operation. It took a great amount of intelligence, a great amount of resources, timing, all that goes into something like this. The world's never seen anything this sophisticated. Now, whether bin Laden was part of that or could have had the ability and the resources to do that, I don't know. But Jim Woolsey's right. No one should escape the net here as we find out who did this, and we will find out who did this.
Is there a sense, though, that, Senator Hagel, is there a sense that, that it definitely was some Middle East-oriented group that coordinated this attack, that it was not necessarily, as Oklahoma City was, a homegrown U.S.-sponsored attack?
I don't know the facts here, but I would think it quite unlikely that it would be a homegrown domestic group involved here. I just don't think that would be the case. What part of the area of the world these perpetrators and cowards are from, I don't know.
Stand by. Here's the Attorney General in the White House briefing room, John Ashcroft.
Today, America has experienced one of the greatest tragedies ever witnessed on our soil. These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They are an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international Legat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information they know about these crimes to that website. It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy?
Every single American
lost something today. And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and their families. It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City, and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that has been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
One of the most cherished freedoms is the freedom of movement, the ability to move freely and safely. But today that freedom was attacked. But we will restore that freedom throughout the national transportation system as soon as possible.
We're looking at a picture also on Capitol Hill where the Senate and House leadership is preparing to speak, flanked by hundreds of members of the U.S. Congress. Here's the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert.
The hearts and souls and feelings of the victims and the families that were a part of this great tragedy that happened in this country today. Our prayers and thoughts and words of consolation goes out to all those who have suffered. But one thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and government stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder to fight this evil that's been perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet. But we have our suspicions. And when that is justified, and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the President, we will stand with this government, and we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you.
Today's despicable acts were an assault on our people and on our freedom. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow. And we will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice. We, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the President and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost.
We know as a nation, as we said, our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you.
A pointed display of bipartisan unity at this critical moment in U.S. history. It seemed like a spontaneous singing of God Bless America by of members of the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, seriously trying to send a message of unity during this difficult moment. Let's go back to Paula Zahn in New York, where she's got more details on this tragic day in Manhattan. Paula?
Thanks so much, Wolf. I think all day long you have seen the images replayed of exactly what happened here in New York City. The city, a victim of multiple attacks by hijacked commercial airlines. Joining me right now is Matt Cornelius, who was in the unfortunate position of being mid-level in Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Matt, thanks for joining us tonight. What happened? Where were you?
Well, I just arrived at work probably about 8:40 a.m. I put my lunch away, and I was getting ready to start the day when all of a sudden we heard this tremendous crash. It was a really loud sound, followed by a sharp jolt in the building, and then the floor kind of seemed to wave.
We are looking at this incredibly dramatic shot of the impact of the airlines hitting the North Tower. You were not aware at all of what could have caused it.
We had no idea. Obviously, we knew something had struck the building. Somebody screamed out, an airplane's hit the building. But I think that was just a guess. And when I thought about that, I thought probably a private plane, because you often see them flying around the World Trade Center. No one could have ever thought that it was a commercial jet plane of that size.
And your immediate instinct, I suppose, was to get out of the building.
Yeah.
Describe the evacuation.
Well, it wasn't, because people hadn't really arrived at work yet, it wasn't very organized. Basically,
now that actually represents the second attack that happened 18 minutes after your building was struck.
Right. So when we got struck, everyone basically started running for the stairways. And we went in immediately to the stairways and started our way down.
Were people pushing and shoving, or was it an orderly exit from the building?
People were confused at first, but once we were in the stairway, people were very orderly.
How long did it take you to get out of the building?
About 45 minutes. Some people were upset. They had gone through the bomb in '93.
How could it take so long to get out of the building? You had 65 flights of stairs. You're a young man, but one would think you could get out of there quicker.
We moved very quickly, probably 15 minutes to the 40th floor. And then after that, we got held up. There were firefighters coming up the stairs, police officers, and I believe FBI agents. So they were coming up, and there were people. There was a man in a wheelchair who they were trying to assist, so we kind of had a hold for him. But people remained calm throughout this and kept saying, you know, we're going to take it one stair at a time. Everybody's going to get out. And, I think we weren't aware of the situation. We thought it was an isolated event. I think had we known what was going on, it would have been a different story. But
these pictures obviously show the unspeakable horror and tragedy, the fallout from which we're only just beginning to grasp. Once you got out of the building, at what point did you become aware of what had truly happened?
Well, I would say the minute as we came out of the building, actually exited the complex, the police officers were screaming, "Don't look up, don't look back, just go." And I, of course, looked back, and I saw that the second tower was indeed on fire. And that's when it hit me that this was something major. I mean, this was a real catastrophic event. And actually, when we came out of the stairs, there was a lot of devastation in the lobby, and actually the center of the complex, the plaza area, there was a lot of debris and some bodies. I mean, it was truly awful.
We have some shots now that we'd like to show you of what some people have described almost as a nuclear winter, when they talked about the amount of soot coming down on those of you who were fleeing these buildings. Now that you've been able to absorb what happened, what's going through your head tonight? You must feel like a very lucky man.
I feel very lucky. I'm so thankful to be alive. My heart goes out to those who don't know about their loved ones or have lost loved ones, and it's still very surreal. I mean, I look down behind us and can't believe that my office building that I go to every day is gone.
Matt, before you go any further, we were just looking at shots of the countless number of New York firefighters that were on the scene. We are just getting information from a union official of some of the 400 firefighters that initially went into that area. 200 may have perished. Matt, we appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us tonight on this incredibly tragic day of our American history. Let's go back to Wolf Blitzer. Once again, Wolf, New York City officials are not confirming, nor is the Pentagon, exactly how many people were injured here or how many people died. I know Governor Pataki of New York was saying earlier this evening it will be many, many days before we have any of those numbers.
Those numbers are being collected, but I'm sure it's way too early, as you point out, Paula, to have even a rough guess how high the number will eventually go. Just to recap once again, President Bush preparing to address the nation in less than an hour or so, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern, an Oval Office address for President Bush from the White House. CNN senior White House correspondent John King is back on the North Lawn of the White House. John, you're back in the briefing room now. John, you were listening to that briefing when we went to the Capitol Hill congressional leadership statements that were being made. Was there any hard news that came out of that briefing?
Indeed, there was, Wolf. Some details on emergency responses taking place. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, other agencies taking steps to provide medical and other disaster relief personnel, but also from the Treasury Secretary, Norman Mineta, a glimpse of what will be the near future, at least, for Americans now traveling around the country. Mr. Mineta saying as a result of this, first and foremost, that he will make the decision tomorrow if and when U.S. commercial air traffic can resume, all planes grounded at least through noon, he said, and when Americans do go to an airport or a train station in the future, likely to see a much higher level of security.
To increase traveler security. Travelers will indeed see increased security measures at our airports, train stations, and other key sites. There will be higher levels of more air luggage will be allowed. There will be more security officers and random identification checks. Travelers may experience some inconveniences, but we ask for your patience.
Now the President is in the Oval Office with his national security team preparing for that address to the American people. About 50 minutes away from now, that address from the Oval Office. 4 members of the President's cabinet briefing here. They refuse to take any questions. White House saying that these cabinet agencies want to gather more information. Attorney General John Ashcroft vowing, though, that the perpetrators of these terrorist attacks, he said, would be discovered and punished. And again, much information dealing with the relief effort underway over at the Pentagon and up in New York City. The Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson, urging Americans, no matter where they live, to donate blood. He said that is one urgent priority right now. Wolf.
Okay, John King, we'll be back to you. But meanwhile, I want to bring in the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who joins us here in our Washington Bureau. Secretary Albright, do you have a sense, you studied this situation, 4 years at the United Nations, 4 years at the State Department, who was responsible for this attack?
I think it's impossible to tell at this time, Wolf, and it's very important to get all the facts straight. But what is essential